It's Board Games as Devotion with special guest Dan Thurot on this episode of Play Saves the World, the ongoing conversation on spirituality and games. Hello and welcome everybody to Play Saves the World. It's so good to have you here today. Thanks for tuning in. My name is Daniel Hilty.
My name is Kevin Taylor.
And my name is Dan Thurot.
Dan, welcome back. We are so grateful to have you return to the podcast after a few years. Kevin, you were looking it up beforehand. It's been about 3 years, right?
3 years. That's it.
3 years, yeah. Under the previous incarnation of the podcast, Board Game Faith was its name back then, but
I still wear the shirt sometimes.
Oh, that's so nice. Thank you.
Yeah, I love that shirt. That was so I'm so happy to be back. Thank you for having me, because that was one of my favorite guest appearances on a podcast ever. So I'm just delighted to be invited back.
That means so much. Thank you very, very much. And it makes my day to know someone out there is wearing the t-shirt. Thank you. That's great. So Dan, please, for folks maybe who didn't hear the first podcast, or maybe they did, but it's been a while, would you mind just letting our listeners or viewers know a little bit about yourself, please?
Sure. My name is Dan Thurot. I write a website called Space Biff. I also write about board games for some other places, but mostly I write about board games, and that's pretty much it. I'm a really boring person, which is not a self-own or anything. I actually think there's great joy in being sort of a boring person, but I also teach at the college level. I teach religion, specifically the history of Christianity. And I spend a lot of time hanging out with my 2 daughters, because they are at an age where they need a lot of attention. So, which I love. I'm not saying that as a complaint at all, to be
right.
clear.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. I appreciate also that you elevate the virtue of boringness, not necessarily as a bad thing. I had a friend and mentor who said we kind of needed to reclaim boringness as not a negative thing necessarily in life. And anyway, yeah, that's. I don't think of you as boring, however. Yeah, but we're glad to have you here, to all of your excitement and all you bring to it.
Well, thank you. Yes, I don't go on many big adventures. I'm a bit of a homebody, but adventures
the life of the mind,
of the soul.
right?
Yeah,
the
maybe.
life of the mind. That's right. Well, thank you. So Kevin, you had the great idea of inviting Dan back today and talking about board games as devotion, and that's really in response to just really the outstanding writing that Dan does on games and life, when we really encourage our viewers and listeners to check out his work. But Kevin, do you mind saying some more? So tell us more about this idea and what you're hoping to explore in our conversation today.
So it really came from Dan Thurot himself, and it's something that, and this is my reading of some of Dan's work, but Dan has occasionally reflected on really thoughtful games that make you consider, I don't know, your station in life and who you are. And these are games such as Amabel Holland, those sorts of games, maybe a Cole Worley game. It gets you it's a game that's not a game. It's a game that's closer to an act of devotion of some sort. And I think that phrase, Dan's hinted at that. And we wanted to see if we could tease that out a little bit, what that looks like and what that means. Dan, does that sound accurate?
Yeah,
it does.
Or a beginning.
Yeah, especially for a beginning. We're kind of straining at a big idea here, which I think is pretty natural whenever we talk about things like art as devotion. So yeah, but I think that's pretty accurate.
When we talk about devotion, that word, a question to all of us, what do we mean just by that word itself?
Right. That is the question that
Let's see what my random plagiarism bot tells me devotion means.
that's
I suppose.
AKA you're referring to your mind. Yeah, I know what you mean.
um, I mean, to me, it's a hard term because it can mean so many things.
Yeah.
Um, and for me, it's changed quite a bit over the years what it could mean. Um, and maybe we'll get into that as well. But I'd be curious to hear, to boomerang it. What is your definition of devotion, Daniel?
That's fair.
Oh,
That's a fair question.
that's
Yeah.
the teacher's move. I know it.
It
I see you,
is, it
Dan.
is, it is. Yeah, yeah, yeah. I mean, yeah, I've been obviously in preparation for this, thinking about it as well, and I'd be interested in hearing your thoughts too, Kevin. But, I mean, there seems to imply some sort of expression of love in it, perhaps, of commitment. Um, it seems often in connection to some sort of greater reality to ourselves, whether we call it the God or the universe or whatever. Um, but not necessarily. You can certainly have devotion toward your spouse or your partner or your children, as well. Yeah, some sort of mix of commitment and love. Um, yeah, I guess those are my initial thoughts. Kevin, how about you? Any thoughts?
When I think of an act of devotion, and this is coming out of my own, background, because that's all I got to some degree, is like in college and other stuff, coming out of a Protestant mindset. A devotion was like reading a devotional book
Hmm.
or reading the
Hmm.
Bible. So my
Yeah,
utmost
yeah,
for his highest, that kind of thing.
yeah, yeah.
And and so when I think of that, I think of it as connecting to something outside of yourself. So it could be
Mhm.
an
Mm.
awareness, it could be connecting with God, spirit, you can define that in different ways. And a devotion, it could be something you do with someone else. So I think of it as this connective act. And that to me is at least one possibility is this board game experience is connecting you beyond just winning or having fun. There's like another connective tissue, fiber,
Mm, mm,
tendon
mm,
there.
mm. I like that.
Yeah.
Something that connects us to an experience bigger than the game itself, perhaps?
Yes.
Is that what I hear you
Yes.
saying? Mm,
Yes.
I like that because I feel like it's sort of clarifying what I feel I mean when I've talked about board games as devotion, where, obviously every time I sit at the table with somebody, we're connecting. So I don't really mean just connecting with people because we're always doing that. So that's almost sort of that's a requirement of play
Right.
with people to some degree anyway, is that level of connection. So I suppose when I talk about devotion, I am thinking when you talk about something outside of ourselves, I do think of, Rudolf Otto's numinous, right? That there is something behind what we perceive, something larger, something awe-inspiring, and it can be hard to define that thing. But when Otto tries to explain, and this is an idea, of course, that like Jung and C.S. Lewis all kind of riffed on in their works, but this notion that there is a reality that lies a little bit behind our perceptions. And when I talk about devotion in games, I do think of us as trying to connect to that third party, that we're sitting at the table, I'm connecting with you, and then the two of us are also connecting with something else. Um, Now, what that thing is, I don't know. I don't know what it
mm,
is. I'm sure that
Right.
some people would be very quick to say what it is, right? I don't know if I want to be quite so hasty.
hmm, mhm.
I'm with you. We can just set that aside and that's going to mean different things to different people. We don't need to get too specific. I do think the contours are probably going to be similar. It's going to be something along the lines of acceptance or connection or right? Kind of that in the moment, that flow state. So it's not that it's utterly different to every single person, but it is going to have a different tonality or something like that, depending on the person and their history and background and situation and everything.
Yeah, and I mean, I've definitely played games where I would say it is something very in line with what is probably all of our background, where I would say, like, I feel like I'm connected to God or to a spirit of some kind. But there are other times where I've played a game where I feel connected to the earth or to somebody who has been dead for centuries, or I feel that very deep connection to an individual. Um, and I, and to be clear, I'm not speaking of some sort of animism. I don't think I'm really connecting to that individual. I'm connecting to this sort of hexaity with them, right? Like thisness of them, to understand them a little, to brush fingers with them across time and place, can feel very removed from myself, even though I know that they're not there, that I'm not really communing with them, but that I am in some sense understanding them in a way that maybe they would find satisfying.
Right. Right. And that makes me think of a book, right? Like you can read a book from someone, by someone from long ago, or maybe even a biography, and you can have that sense of connection with that person, sort of getting in their mind, getting in their world. And the game can do that as well if it's a historical game, especially, sort of feeling what it must have felt like. So,
And sometimes the examples are a little funny, I think. I I've been thinking in preparation for chatting with both of you about some of the games that I would say have evoked this sensation in me. And some of them are very positive feelings. But there's also a game that I listed as one of my favorite games to come out last year that is a game about a war criminal. It's called Anota, designed by a Spanish designer, Paco Gradaya. And that game made me feel connected to this person with this very deep sympathy and a sort of pity. And I did feel that elevated sense where I felt connected to this person. I felt, I don't know, mercy for this person, despite him committing terrible acts of evil. Um, and also feeling connected to his victims, which is a very strange sort of example, because I in playing that game, I was just so impressed that a game could make me feel such
hmm,
closeness to the humanity of somebody who was doing terrible things.
hmm, hmm. And I'm thinking about, let's say, if you'd read a biography of this guy. So you'd had a book and it would have given you, assume it's a good book, you would have felt connected as well, but in a different way, because all you can control with the book is, you can go backwards or forwards, right? But the author is controlled the paragraph flow. You might even disagree with some of that. You can say, well, why didn't you talk about this? Or why is it in this order? But you don't have a lot of agency. But in the board game experience, you get to be Anoda, right? You're playing
Yeah.
as him. And I've not played it, but I read your review and I would love to play it. But yeah, you're getting to feel like you're him because you get to make his choices and they matter.
Yeah.
Unlike,
And
say, a
it's
novel or a book.
right. Well, and it's interesting because so I've read 3 biographies about Hiro Onoda. And I feel like actually the board game was the one that did the best at capturing um, some of the character's ticks, some of his hypocrisies, some of his humanity, um, which is rare for a board game. I feel like to do a better job in creating a portrait of an individual than some other things.
What was it that allowed you are you able to say what allowed the game to create that greater sense of connection and sympathy than the biographies? Was it this element of agency in it? Was it just
I think that's a great question. And I think that agency plays a role in it, like C. Tai Nguyen talking about that games are the art form of agency. I don't think that's always true. I think that can kind of go too far, but I like that framework as one conceptual model. But I think one of the things that Gradaya did that really worked for me was that he was a little bit less credulous than some of Onoda's biographers. Where, for instance, even Werner Herzog wrote a book about Onoda. And these books tend to accept Onoda at face value, that he really did not. So he was a Japanese imperial soldier who became the second longest holdout of the Imperial Army after World War II. I think it was 29 years that he remained on this island in the Philippines, committing terrible atrocities. He committed murder. Of course, he committed many smaller crimes like theft. He had a trio of companions who he was sort of forcing to stay with him for much of his duration. And so I think that one of the reasons I really was compelled by this portrait and felt a great deal of sympathy for Hiro Onoda from this board game was the space it held open for the fact that this person might have been mentally ill, that he might have been afraid, that many of the virtues that he believed in, virtues like facing reality, that he talked very publicly about, it is a Japanese virtue to face reality. And yet here is a man who you spend the entire board game studiously avoiding reality. He will not go home and repair the damage of the war. He must keep fighting the war. In a way, it's sort of this like pseudo-masculine juvenile fantasy that it's like playing Call of Duty all day instead of going out and trying to make the world better. And he was out there living that. And to me, I don't think I had ever conceptualized that man in that way, to say that he's not just a product of nationalism gone awry, although he is that. He's also afraid of facing himself and facing his complicity in terrible acts. And I don't know if that's the case. I don't know if that's true or not, but I liked that the board game provided more of that portrait than multiple, including Onoda's own, biographies of his actions.
And is it because of the designer, you think, or is it because we're not in the world of narrative? We're in a different world. Like someone's not creating a narrative to explain it.
I think that plays a part in it. I think that the game, in presenting you systems, in letting you just sit down and examine your own thoughts with it. Like there's this concept in game design called like submersion or submission, where as you play, and this is something you often see with people who gamble compulsively when they play slot machines, and they're not playing to win, they're playing to be submerged, to kind of conceal themselves from their emotions. It can be a very pleasurable feeling. And as we play certain board games, their repetition, I think, lends itself, especially in solitaire games, very well to this sense of submersion, where you are handing yourself over to the game and you're alone with your thoughts. And it can be very rewarding in a game atmosphere to be able to meditate on actions in a way that a narrative precludes. I mean, often books that are meditative, you'll read and then you'll pause, and then you'll read and you'll pause. The agency you have in that moment is to cease, right? To choose to be alone with your thoughts. But a game where you have to, especially a board game where you have to physically carry out repetitive motions, I think invites the player to think while they're carrying out necessary bookkeeping, for example. And
That's really interesting.
And I think that's pretty unique to board games. I don't even think this would work in a digital video game, just because the bookkeeping would be handled by the computer, right? In the board game, the act of having to lean over and pick up a token and think about what it represents, and place it on the board, that these are villagers who are hunting for you because you stole from their village. Or this is an increasing alert because you've committed a crime. Having to think about what that is instead of having it just placed there or told what it is, I think invites the player to do something very different than if you had read that narrative or been told it or watched it on a film reel or whatever.
This reminds me a little of how sometimes a book or a movie might affect me, but it's in the remembering of it later. So you're for example, I don't know if you guys are into horror movies, but Bone Temple is out, and that's a
Yeah.
really interesting movie. It's very gory. Let me warn you. So,
Yeah.
did you see it, Dan?
I did, and I loved it.
I loved
But
it too.
I would not recommend my mother see it.
Yeah. Yeah, there's bits that make me squirm, or one bit, but I thought about that movie a lot, but to your point, it wasn't in the midst of it or the pausing, it was the driving, and bits would come into my head, and a book might do that as well, or, uh, you know, thinking about something I've gotta compose or write, I might while I'm driving's a great time for me because my mind, like you're saying, I'm kinda occupied in a way because 'cause I'm driving, but 40% of my brain can wander
Right.
and cogitate.
Does this relate at all to what I, folks more recently have described as flow? But I think I think the concept is more ancient than that. But just this sense of kind of losing oneself in a in an action and an undertaking that becomes so familiar to you that it's almost kind of an exercise in self-transcendence or self-annihilation or whatever we call it. But
Yeah.
I find myself thinking about that and whether games lend themselves to that more or not. I don't know. But yeah.
I think it can, and I think it can maybe move in both directions, right? Like, I think some games, and there's this modern design tendency to make a game so smooth that there isn't downtime and there aren't hiccups and you aren't doing
Mm.
too much upkeep. And there's obviously a benefit to that. But I think one of the, like in this case, I'm specifically talking about a game that does have a little bit of upkeep. Like it is providing you these punctuation marks where you really have no choice but to think about the actions you've undertaken. So, but I absolutely agree that both directions of that, right? Like providing for space within the game and kind of just flow state, like you're not even thinking, you're just undertaking. These are probably both elements, kind of maybe on the same spectrum, but opposite ends, that would create a certain introspection. I think it's pretty.
Creating int That's a
I,
great line, sorry. Yeah.
I
Creating introspection, yeah.
like I think it's there's a good reason why board games, the way we conceptualize them as things that are played with dice and with cards and with uncertainty, are the realm of faith when we rewind a certain number of years. That I the first apostle after um was chosen by dice, right? Like
Right, right.
um
Yes, yes.
games were meant to be the way that God would speak his aleatory desires to you. Um, and I don't think that that is something that I'm saying as a religious statement. I'm saying that as a very human statement, or it can be religious too. I'm not trying to discount that. I just think that we as humans, it's very natural for us to see that numinous in random chance and in these things that we are sort of impacting but not really, that you throw dice and they speak back to you. um that welcoming of introspection, I think, is very natural to certain types of play. um anyway.
I'm running out of space on my note page. I love all these things you're saying, Dan. Thank you.
You can
Those are
flip it
great.
over, Daniel.
I'm
There's
gonna
a
flip it over
backside to it.
to the other side.
What? What is this magic? No, that is rich, and it makes me think of how, part of religion is, uh, accepting a certain lack of control. Would
Mm-hmm.
seem to me there's this sort of bit of, like, I'm going to trust at least some aspect, and so that does have that connection to chance. Like, I can't plan everything out because random things may happen. And of course, the
Right.
truth is random things happen to everyone, but you're kind of, at least in theory, trying to acknowledge to some degree a lack of agency over things, and makes me think of
It's
games,
interesting.
yeah, and dice, and yeah, the uh, what was the Chinese thing, the I Ching,
Sure.
right?
Yeah.
Which is like Yeah, that kind of thing. So, um, tarot cards, all those things are ways of accessing the randomness. Opening a Bible like some people would do and see what it's telling you today.
Right. How many times, I mean, when I was a Mormon missionary, that was a common practice to I'm feeling so much despair and hopelessness, and people threw trash at me today. Let's say a quick prayer and then flip to a random page in the Bible and smack our finger down and see what Jesus is saying to you. And
The
half
Lord
the
has
time
to say.
and you get some weird
Genealogy.
absolute nonsense out of there. And somehow you make it fit, because there is that notion to religion, right? That we are placing agency over static at times. Um,
I love this. I think what I've heard us saying is both that board games can be devotional in that somehow through the exercise of agency, but also that board games can be devotional in our encounter with in allowing us to have an encounter with our lack of agency as well.
Because I don't know what Daniel's going to do next as he launches his
No, you
ship, his
don't.
armada at me again.
That's right. Get ready for this. No.
Get ready for this. Oh, crap. Not my home world.
Then where are the plans? No. That's great. I maybe just to shift a little bit, Kevin. I know you this is something you had mentioned in your kind of show notes thoughts for the episode. This idea of exploring our own identity, our own kind of role in the world.
Mhm.
And we seem to be getting a little bit into this already. Dan, I read. I think I read that you shared, and correct me if I'm wrong, that you lifted up this issue of what um, role playing games versus tabletop games, and is there this conversation, this debate, whatever you want to call it, about what allows for imagination or for exploring other roles more. Um, I think it seems, at least at first blush, it seems really apparent the ability of role playing games to help us explore other identities and things like that. But
yeah.
I mean, but what I hear is saying is this is something that's certainly possible through more traditional tabletop games as well, or are they limited to some extent in that?
I think that right now there's this really weird discourse between and there I mean this isn't new, but right now it seems to have flared up again like a fever, where one medium is seen as superior to the other despite them being really cross-pollinated. um
Yeah, yeah,
um like women's parlor games and women's bridge club are kind of like both the dawn of these modern hobbies, right? Like where you play like a parlor game of let's pretend and bridge, and they're the same clubs, they're the same societies, they're the same women, and we have sort of turned them into these separate tracks. And I do think they teach us different things, but I think they're a little more interrelated than some of their vocal um, proponents would tell us. I do think they are slightly different mediums, though. For example, I think roleplay lets us inhabit another role pretty seamlessly. Um, However, I think board games are very good at showing us a role, um, or showing us a system. Board games tend to be really good about showing systemic positivity, negativity. Like, there's a reason that so many board games are about economics. They're they're very good at presenting like, here's how money works, here's how trade works, here's how negotiation works. Those are systemic things, but at the same time, I've had tremendous experiences, including things that I would say are devotional style experiences in the vein that we're talking about, both with role playing games and with traditional board games that don't contain much role play. Um, and so it's hard for me to see too much delineation. I think anybody taking a really hard stance on one being superior to the other is probably, it strikes me as special pleading. they like role play more than they like board games, so they argue it's better.
Yeah, yeah, you're right, right, right.
Yeah, to your point, I've seen kind of a bland game in terms of theming can still bring out a certain role in us, like the trash talk or the you're gonna shoot the moon type person, right? Like it, we can inhabit a role even outside of the game mechanics. Like I'm not being told you should be risky, but I can decide to be risky in the game. And then later when we play it again, you guys are like, remember that time you were just swore you could do that, then you got a 1. So then it becomes a bit of the lore of the game. So yeah, that itself is kind of a role-playing game.
And it's interesting that, one of last year's best games, I think, was Molly House. I don't know if either of you have played it. But that's a game that invites you to play a role that is very foreign to most of its players. Not only because most of its players will be, have kind of the ordinary gender or sexual orientation, but also because the game, even to people who might identify as queer, the identity of queer people in 17th century London is very different from modern queer identity. And so the game is asking kind of everyone to step outside of themselves a little bit. And so it's taking you to this role in a very board game way, but then it's raising these moral questions of you that it's sort of asking you as the player to now role play in this very foreign mindset. So it's doing both in a sense. And the way that the game uses its card play to evoke like a certain wildness, like being at a party or having you're at your own party and someone is mean to you and suddenly it's your party. You're going to cry if you want to. And it does so many interesting things that are very board gamey and very role play-y at the same time in a way that I haven't seen any other medium really accomplish. And that's a game that specifically I've had so many powerful experiences with it, where one of the things I do on the side is I have worked for years with a group that does outreach to queer Mormon youth, specifically who are struggling or their families aren't accepting them or whatever the case may be. And this group has only in the last year or two started doing play therapy, where they start using board games as a way to help people open up, feel more comfortable. Obviously, there's a lot of role play, but I've been able to sit down with parents and children with Molly House and use it to kind of explain, like, this is not how your child is, but this is still explaining something universal about the desire to be seen, the desire to connect with people, the need to find a partner. And to take that, and I've had some wonderful, tender experiences where parents, after playing this sort of dense, maybe they've played Catan or something, and they play this game and they don't really understand the rules and they're fumbling through it. But the game is still good enough and clear enough that with some instruction, they're able to come out the other side and say, I think I get it a little better. And to me, those are acts of devotion in the sense that these are parents who are committed to their children. This is a child who's committed to exploring themselves. For me, I'm committed to being annoying and making people play complicated board games, and we're all connecting over our various acts of devotion. And it's been truly remarkable, I think, to have these experiences with people over a board, over a folding card table, that to me are every bit as present and awe-inspiring as those that I've had in a church.
Hmm. Hmm. And when you say the parents maybe say, I get it a little bit more, they're they're getting their child more, right? That they're understanding, is that the
Yes,
that
yeah.
they're getting? Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah, I love that ability to connect to a different mindset, a different time. So yes, Molly House is really cool. It evokes that party sense. So I played it a few times. I have I've not managed to play it where it got a nail biter, right? Like somebody
Hmm.
was the traitor. And I don't know if we did the rules wrong or we just, everything seemed to work out. But I love that one. And I love Endurance by Amabel Holland
Oh yeah.
because it's such a metaphor and you can play the whole game just as a survival. And then you read the instructions more closely, and she's saying, this describes my transition to understanding who I really am and the miracle of threading that needle and not dying in the process. And then I read that and it's like time stopped for me. I'm like, oh, this is what this is like. And how clever are you to have created a whole game about it's sort of like the Narnia thing, right? Like you're like, oh, and you're like,
Right.
that's what this is about. Wow. And you see through the looking glass. And yeah, I felt I don't know, yeah, it gave me a whole different way of understanding. No, I shouldn't say a whole different way. It gave me just a different lens. It's like I could see it from a different point of view than just intellectual.
Yeah, I'm
So
glad you brought
yeah.
that up because I'm going to write that down because Endurance should be on my list because that's absolutely a game. I'm thinking of trying to write an article in which I try to express some of these ideas more clearly because many people have asked about it. Because
Hmm.
I think until now I've only really alluded to it, um, but
And that's
Endurance
what I
is a
picked up
tremendous
on. Yeah,
example.
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and even Nicaea, another Amabel Holland, of this sense of how fragile history is, and later we claim this absoluteness, but you realize it's back then is more like now than we care to admit. It's just people kind of
And
being
some of these are
people.
very challenging games. I don't know the texture of your audience. Um, but some of these are games where I have had people in my faith tradition, at least, or some in kind of sister traditions, Protestantism from America, be very upset with some of these games. Um, and so I'm always a little nervous, honestly, to talk about them, which I suppose, you mentioned acts of devotion broadly. I think that one of the things I get out of many of these games is a sense of trying to be courageous. Um, which is yeah, so when I'm writing about these games, sometimes I will admit I have to try to pump myself up a little bit. I know I'm going to get some nasty emails, and
Mm.
I consider that when I'm sitting down to write those, and I'm feeling a little afraid, and having to remind myself that that's when one can be brave, is only really when you're afraid. And to me, that becomes an act of devotion around the game as well, is the act of discussing it or sharing it with people that maybe one is a little hesitant to engage with. Um, and maybe that's the old missionary in me. I don't know. You're both you're both pastors. You're both teachers. What would you say?
When people
Go ahead, Daniel.
respond,
Answer the
yeah,
question.
when people respond, well, I was trying to, yeah, and it's such a great insight. I was just trying to explore kind of my own thoughts on it as well. So yeah, so I guess the question is, how do we respond when we encounter resistance or reluctance to explore or talk about something, right? In our parishes, in our churches, in our worlds. That's kind of the the broader
Yeah,
question here?
well,
Yeah.
yeah, like I think that is often our act of devotion that
Yeah,
many
yeah,
that I think anyone
yeah,
can really share is acting when one is afraid.
yeah, yeah. It reminds me of what you were saying earlier, Dan, about the game, that, allowed you to understand the fear underlying, um, the, I'm sorry, I forget his name,
Yeah, Anoda.
the
Yeah.
Onoda, thank you, thank you. That the game allowed you to understand the fear, that perhaps was underlying so much of who Onoda was and what he was doing. I mean, I think that's a great insight for this question as well, that I when we encounter resistance like that, I know in myself, or, you know, my gut reaction is to raise up my hackles, and to be even more defensive or dismissive. Um, but in some ways, it's also kind of invitation to try to discover the fear that's there in the other
Mm.
person and in me, and what that fear has to teach us. Not that we give into the fear or are controlled by it, but but it can help us to see more clearly ourselves and the other person, and maybe, yeah, seeing that as an invitation to both find a point of sympathy with the other person, because we all know what it's like to be afraid, like you
Mhm.
said, but also an invitation to greater clarity too, and trying to name that and explore it, both in the other person and in myself.
Yeah.
I don't know, Kevin, any thoughts from you on
Yeah.
your pastoring or teaching?
I mean, in the church, and I'm at a small church, you really, your main job is to try to keep things together. It's a family, and things are so fragile in a small church. You want to make sure if you fight, it's really, 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 really important. Otherwise, if it's over the carpet and the church closes because half the people got mad, like you've kind of failed. So you
Sure.
want to
Right, right, right.
You got to pick your battles wisely. As a pastor friend told me once, you don't want to get crucified on a toothpick. So make sure you're getting
That's right.
crucified over something important. Um, so yeah, in the church, I think you do try to keep things appropriate and polite, insofar as you're not betraying any major social commitment. I mean, there are times and places where you do have to speak up, but you want to make sure it's correct. But so I don't know, when you're talking about an email newsletter, I guess you talking about upsetting friends, family, people or just anonymous people? Because at the end of the day, it's your flippin' newsletter, right? It's
Yeah,
your
I mean,
truth.
it is interesting that some people will reach out and want to have, yeah, and to be clear, most of the discussions that I have talking about board games, talking about play and its potential, are very positive. But it is interesting that some people will reach out and just want to shout and threats and all that. And I'm always curious about if I'm reacting in a useful way,
Mm,
um or not. And sometimes I'm sure it's more useful than others. But it does at times impact me, where I'm sitting down and I feel that little tickle, where I think, can I write this in such a way that I won't offend somebody? And that worries me, because I feel like I feel like that's a lot of the fear that, growing up as a religious person, was always pushing me to not do the right thing. Was,
mm,
I don't want to offend somebody. I don't want to say the wrong thing. I want to be polite. I want to be nice. And often it was when I was making those considerations that I created some of my life's worst regrets, because I was pre-censoring. I was pre-acquiescing to a bully. I was surrendering before a battle had even begun. And much of my feeling toward these games now is that many of these are works of art that deserve to be talked about plainly and boldly, um, because they themselves are plain and bold, and are speaking to this, third party, this awe-inspiring, wondrous thing that binds us together. Um, anyway,
mm.
Yeah, it seems to me the people that are offended are just reading the wrong newsletter. And at times in a church, you have that thought, and I'm sure Daniel's had it, and Dan, you've seen it, where you just meet people and you're just thinking, you'd be a lot happier if you just went over there to that church. Like, those are your people. You're here because your mom grew up here or whatever, and you think this is your people, but those people over there are just like you. Go over there. But they won't, right? You just wish you could sift everyone into their appropriate little silos.
Dear.
Because then, right? Well, I mean, yeah, I didn't mean that quite as ugly as I sound, but I've seen sometimes folks that, not my current church, but in times that they wanted to push things a certain way that wasn't what everyone else wanted. And they could find a group of people that aligned with what they wanted pretty easily. Just, just Google it and right. So it's kind of the problem of you're in the wrong place. And so I guess I'm thinking of that in terms of the newsletter of like, you're in the wrong place. Like, this is Dan Thurot and this is how he approaches it. So don't read Dan Thurot if this is going to upset you.
There is
Don't
that
go
element,
see
right? Yeah.
Don't go see Bone Temple if you don't like freaky deaky stuff. Just
Yeah.
don't
Yeah.
go.
I remember
No one's
being in
making you.
there was a movie that's quite shocking called Infinity Pool, a horror movie. And I remember, I don't know why, but we went and saw it, and it was me and my friend and then these two grandmas in the theater. And it was such a distressing film that they kept getting up and pacing up in front. And at the end, they very loudly turned and spoke to me and my friend and said, "Wasn't that the worst movie you've ever seen?" And I said, "Well, I really liked it." But, and they were in fighting mood. So they were like, "Wait, what could any person possibly like about this?" And it just occurred to me, you could have left at any time. This movie was
Yes,
morally
yes.
appalling. It was asking very difficult questions of the viewer. If you don't want to be asked those questions, if you are repulsed by what you see, if you feel like your soul is being degraded by what is there, you can just leave. The exit is illuminated.
I
True
think this
words.
also, brings up for me just a couple things. I mean, I guess I'm going back at first to the question about how do we handle it. One of the more helpful pieces of advice I got from a pastor a long time ago is, so often when a person is getting mad at me or whatever, but I think it's very often not about really me,
Mm-hmm.
or it is about that fear or about that whatever. It's about the thing that their mom and dad said 50 years ago, or it's about, and it's about all of this stuff but the but another theme it reminds me of is something that I that you've written about, Dan, with this just sense of like, coming to terms with what we bring to the experience, right? Being honest about what we bring to the experience of a game or a shared activity. Um, th- th- you know, eh, Both for good or for bad. It can create a positive experience that our background that we bring to this game, or it create a really negative experience. I read um, your review on of Keep the Faith,
Mm-hmm.
um, which, by the way, I found haunting in all of the best ways. So thank you for that.
Well, thank you.
Yeah, I wrote down your final point was this idea that religion, um, maybe the one commonality of all religious experiences is that we all like to pretend that we're the ones that have never changed, right? That we're the ones that go back to the very beginning. And
Right.
uh, and I don't know how you've been listening into my conversations, but I've used that line many times. So that was indicting in all the best ways. The But just the sense that, if we bring, what expectations we bring to an experience, whether it be a movie or a game, there it helps to have some sort of awareness and reckoning of that as well. You mentioned in that article this, an experience when uh, someone all of a sudden can bring to a gaming experience, something from their background, from their story, that suddenly that very much shifts the gaming experience, right, for everyone there. Uh, it called to mind, a year or two ago, I was playing a party game, just a silly party game with some folks, some of whom I didn't know super well, and there was just a silly party game question in it that just really brought up this really difficult part of this person's story, and it just
Hmm.
changed everything. And I don't blame the person at all. But I don't know, I mean, yeah, to what extent are we I guess maybe it's also to say is maybe games as devotion is also an invitation to come to understand parts of ourselves more clearly too, and what we bring to the game. Maybe?
Yeah. I would hope so. My wife has a code with me now that when we're in a social situation, that she will say a certain word if I'm starting to get too heavy, because to me this is joy, is to have heavy conversations
Yeah,
and
yeah.
to learn about somebody's troubled past and to share some of mine, and in so doing kind of lift each other up a little bit. Like, to me
Yep.
that is very
Yeah,
joyful.
yeah,
And
yeah.
but not
Very
everybody
pastoral.
wants, yeah, no, not everybody wants to do that, and I'm really terrible at recognizing that. And so my wife will kind of be like, give me the, you're becoming a bummer, you're not a good hang right now, and as like a code word, like, it's time for you to do some small talk, like none of this like talking about dead theologians and what that means for suffering, like let's cut that out. And um and so so I what you're saying is, to me, just like, this is what games are for, is for us to sit down and share and create an avenue for us to learn more about ourselves. Um, but I have to recognize that that's not what a lot of people want from their board games. They want to, do a fun puzzle, spend some time thinking about fake money.
Mhm. I'd like to attend a party
A little
with you
bit
and
of
your
little
wife.
escape.
You sound fun. Go ahead,
Well,
Kevin, I interrupted you.
well, if you're ever in Salt
No,
Lake,
no.
let me know and we'll have you over for dinner, and you can find out firsthand what a bummer I can
That's
be.
right.
What a bad hang.
Remember that.
What
Not
about
at
a
all, not
bad
at all.
Oh, me. Well, any concluding thoughts as we wrap it up? Of devotion. I I did think sometimes games are playing with symbols, right? And we're
Oh
kind of
yeah.
bringing certain meaning to it as we bring. And it did make me think of active devotion. Sometimes you get that with elements of, again, I'm going to Christianity, but um, you hear the Psalter read and it talks about the balm of Gilead, and you're like, I don't know what that is. Sounds kind of nice. Or, what does that mean
Right.
in my life? And there is a little bit of that, either reading the Bible, reading devotional, or being in a worship service, where sometimes it gets you thinking about your life symbolically, right? Like, what is the balm of Gilead to me? And I've been in Bible studies in the past where people are going to do that directly, right? What is your what is your cross to bear? What is your hope? What is your promised land? And maybe that's another point of connection, is that semiotic landscape, especially when something like the Bible or church, you are dealing with ancient texts, and so we don't really know. There's a lot of mystery to it because so much has been lost.
Yeah. What that brings up for me is that I had a very powerful, very uh, disconcerting gaming experience back in November, where I was invited by a Jewish game designer to play a game about the Holocaust. And there was a moment in that game when we were instructed to tear a card in half. And to me, it was just so evocative of that. We think of these game pieces, I think, very naturally as being somewhat sacred, because they are, of course, these are the mouthpiece of God. This is
Mm,
this is
right.
how the static speaks to us. And so to destroy one has all that solemnity of, throwing an offering into the fire, or turning over breaking a cross or something. It was just a very distressing, necessarily moment. And I've thought about that game quite a few times. I even kept my torn up cards for weeks afterwards, until my wife was like, you're
Mm,
spending a little too much time staring at these cards and being somber. So I had to throw them away. But the way that games create symbolism, I think, is fascinating, because it is ultimately just a symbolic language that we're all engaging in, isn't it?
Yeah. And religion can function that way as well.
yeah,
Sometimes
yeah.
people say, I'm going to pray for you. And they actually actually may not pray for you. But what they're meaning is, I care. And that's a
Yeah,
challenge, I think, for people to hear, is that you don't have to be offended or take that as hypocrisy. You can just see that that's how they say, hey, I'm worried, I care. And the
sure.
mechanics of it are kind of beyond that moment of when they express sympathy. So that's a semiotic symbology there going on as well. It's sort of a code when you go into church of how you talk, and then you go home and people start popping a beer and watch the game because the game has been put up, right? The mass has ended. You go home.
Yeah, now we go home to the real religion, the real
Go home.
national church, the cathedral.
That's right. That's right. That's right. Pigskin. Well, thank you so much, Dan. Always provocative and interesting. And thank you for all your great work. Spacebiff.com, correct?
Yep. Thank you. Yep, that's me. Thank you for having me on. It was lovely to chat with both of you again.
Dan, it was just great. We
Excellent.
really appreciate you being with us. This has been a wonderful, wonderful conversation.
Well, thank you.
Absolutely.
Yes, and I very much appreciate both of your insights. So